Evan. I'm Evan Watalis, and thank you so much for tuning in live here on my X account at Evan with Sports. You can find it on YouTube and Facebook Live as well. Talking Sports with Evan. Lots to talk about today. The Packers coming off a loss to the Detroit Lions a week ago today, a game that they lost on a last-second field goal, 34-31. So I'm going to give some thoughts on that game, close the door, move on to the Seattle Green Bay game, which is going to be a pretty tough game for Green Bay overall. I'm going to give some thoughts on that game as well. But the Packers fell to the Lions, as I mentioned. I'm going to talk that. And then Bill Belichick coaching college football. How crazy is that? How crazy does that sound that one of the best NFL coaches of all time is now coaching at North Carolina? I don't really know what to think of it, but it's interesting, and I'm going to give some thoughts there. Going to talk some college sports and NIL and transfer portal as well during the show, and then talk about coaches in the NFL that are likely on the hot seat. Things aren't going well for some teams. Saw an article from Fox Sports earlier today. Well, it was from a couple of days ago, but I saw it today. And I'm going to talk about that article and give my thoughts on these coaches that are on the hot seat. And at the end of the day, why it doesn't matter, because these teams are going to screw it up anyway. So with that said, thank you for watching. Podcast version of the show will be available anywhere you get your podcast starting tomorrow morning, probably right around 8. Probably right around 8 o'clock. You can find this show as every show I've ever done as well if you go to sportsthoughtsfromevan.substack.com. Every article that I've written, which isn't a lot of articles, but there's some there, and every podcast I've ever done since the start of Talking Sports with Evan, it's been the Evan Witallison Show, it's been the Evan Witt Show, it's been a couple names throughout the existence of me podcasting solo. But you can find every show I ever did, including interviews with Al Snow, former WWE and ECW wrestler, interview with Glacier, interview with Gangrel. Got a chance to interview those guys. You're going to find all of those interviews, as well as interviews with Andy Herman from Pack-A-Day Podcast, Kevin Holden, Drew Burgorn, everything I've ever done, you're going to find on sportsthoughtswithEvan.substack.com. So, going to get started on the meat of the show, the Packers and the Lions. And if you saw my TikTok, if you saw my Twitter, you saw me share a video on instant reactions from the game. And looking on TikTok, I ruffled some feathers, which I figured I would. I figured some Detroit Lion fans were going to be mad at me because they didn't listen to other points I made, but they heard the one point that I made, that it was a poorly officiated game, and it was. And I'm not a blame the officials guy. I'm not going to sit here and blame the officials. I'm a football official myself. I understand how difficult it is to make calls in the spur of the moment. There's things you don't see. There's things you miss. It just happens. Officials are human. They don't watch the game with super slow motion from 12 different angles, from frame by frame, breaking things down before they have to decide if it was a hold or not, if it was pass interference or not, if it was a face mask or not. They got to make a decision right then and there in the spur of the moment to decide, is this what I saw? And to me, the Packer-Lions game was poorly officiated. There are some things that were missed that is just hard to imagine that they missed it. But it happens in football sometimes. It's the human element of the officiating. Next year, they're going to explore the replay assist for things like face masks. They're going to add those to it, like the should have been contact to the head of Jordan Love early in the game. I think their first series of the game. Things like that, maybe the replay assist can assist on. But until then, football is played by humans. It's officiated by humans. That's just the way it is. So The officials were not good. However, as I always say too, don't put yourself in position to have a bad call affect the outcome of the game. Don't allow the game to come down to that. But the Packers to me are not as far away from the Lions as some people are saying. 34-31. They lost combined 13 points to the Lions between two games. And both games the Packers had opportunities to win. Both games the Packers had opportunities to defeat Detroit, but game one, I went in depth about what happened there. And game two was some of the more of the same. The Detroit Lions are a very good football team, very well-coached team. They don't make a lot of mistakes. They just don't. The Packers did capitalize on one of the mistakes, or two of the mistakes Detroit made, an interception. They ended up scoring a touchdown, and Detroit, for some bizarre reason, going for it on fourth down in their own territory, giving the ball to the Packers at around the 30-yard line. Those are really the only two mistakes to me that the Packers made. But with that said, Detroit doesn't make a lot of mistakes. So don't help Detroit. That is key. But you had some ill-timed penalties. You had ill-timed drop. You had a turnover by Christian Watson. Things that you can't do against Detroit. And I talked about that last week, Wednesday, on what the Packers needed to do to beat the Detroit Lions. And it's going to be a big factor in beating Seattle. Seattle forces turnovers, and if you make mistakes, they're going to make you pay. That's ultimately why Seattle's been playing so good lately, is their defense has been giving the offense short fields, and they've been capitalizing on it. Detroit is another team that if you make a mistake, they will capitalize on. As we saw a week ago today, the Detroit made capitalizations on the Packers' mistakes, either missed coverage, a missed tackle, not getting home, just a bunch of reasons why, the mistakes the Packers made that were self-inflicted, that they got to stop. The other reason the Packers lost the game is they couldn't get consistent pressure on Jared Goff. They just couldn't. Goff ended the day 31 of 41 for 283 yards, 3 touchdowns, and interception. The fourth quarter, I think at one point I saw that he was 14 of 14. He's having all day to throw. The Lions offense as a whole weren't that explosive, but they didn't have to be because you couldn't get them off the field. And that's the other problem. The Packers could not get the Lions off the field when they had to. The Lions ultimately punted the ball 2 times. They punted the ball twice. They won 4 or 5 on fourth down. You need to get Detroit off the field. You can't let them just go 80 yards every single time because you can't get them off the field. You held them to 2 field goals and 2 punts. You got to get Detroit off the field. And that was the 2 biggest areas where the Packers struggled. They couldn't get Detroit off the field, and they made too many mistakes. Offensively, the early game plan, I don't really know what the Packers are trying to do. First of all, I think Matt LaFleur, and I like Matt LaFleur. I think Matt LaFleur is a very good football coach. However, I think he overthinks things sometimes, and I think he comes across, I guess, I don't know if frightened's the right word, but he comes across frightened sometimes. He comes across like he's a little bit scared. The Packers, out of the bye, have been taking the ball every time. If the team defers, obviously going to take the ball. If the Packers win the toss, they've been taking the ball. And guess what? Miami, they had a bit of a struggle on that opening drive, but they got the ball back for Alpha Muff. But they've driven down the field and they scored. The Packers have scored first against the Bears. They scored first against the Dolphins. They scored first against the 49ers. That is what the Packers had been doing. But against Detroit, which they also took the ball first against Detroit, I believe. But against Detroit, yeah, they did because Detroit got the ball out of the locker room. The Packers wanted the ball first in case they were losing at halftime. Second. They wanted the ball first out of the locker room at halftime. Sorry. The Packers wanted the ball first in the second half in case they were losing going in the locker room. I don't like that way of thinking. I really don't. To me, that's soft. To me, that is worried and coaching scared. And I guess that'd be a good way to put it. Matt LaFleur coaches scared sometimes. And last Thursday night was a perfect example of Matt LaFleur coaching scared. I want the ball out of the locker room in case we go into halftime losing. I want the opportunity to score out of the locker room in case we're losing. I don't like that way of thinking. And I know I just said that. I'll say it again. I don't like that way of thinking. If you're going to give the ball to Detroit first, make it because you trust your defense. Make it because you want your defense to make a statement. Make it because you want your defense to punch the Detroit Lions in the mouth on that opening series. Don't make it that, well, we might be losing at halftime, so I kind of want the ball out of the locker room so we don't have what happened the last game. Well, we had the pick six, and then Detroit got the ball in the locker room and scored another point out of halftime. Stop thinking that way. And I guess that's just the way I put it. Matt LaFleur, at times, coaches scared. Matt LaFleur has evolved quite a bit as a play caller, as a head coach, but there's still things that he does that drive me crazy, like coaching scared. The what ifs. What if this happens? Whatever. I think that was one of the Packers' biggest issues, too, is Matt LaFleur is coaching the game scared, at least to start the game. After the fumble by Christian Watson, the Packers seemed to have no problem moving the football the rest of the game. The Packers punted the ball 3 times, but the first 2 possessions were punts. I think they had one other punt after that. But overall, the Packers moved the ball at will. They didn't have a problem moving the football after that fumble by Christian Watson, which was a big catch and run that unfortunately Watson fumbled, which you got to have better ball security. You really do. You know the situation. Don't try to do too much, because that's the thing. Detroit gets you to try to do too much, and then you make a mistake. When you try to do too much, you make mistakes. You had the catch, secure the ball, get knocked out of bounds, whatever. Just be done with the play, live to fight another day. Don't try to go in the air and put the ball away from your body because you're trying to get extra yards or whatever happened there. Make sure you protect the football. Do your job. That is key. Every player on the field needs to do their job, basically. Not even basically. Every player needs to do their job. Jacobs, I was impressed with, aside from 3.7 yards per carry. I was impressed with him. He had 18 carries, 3 touchdowns. I think they could have got him involved in the passing game a little bit more. He's been really good the last few games, getting the ball out of the backfield on checkdowns. Christian Watson, 4 for 114. Tucker Kraft, 3 for 41 and a touchdown. Jaden Reed, 1 target, 0 for 0. You got to get the 3 guys who should be getting a lot of opportunities to catch the football. It's Christian Watson, Tucker Kraft, Jaden Reed. Those 3 need to be focal points of your offense. You got Watson, 4 receptions. You got Kraft, 3 receptions. You got nothing with Jordan Reed. And I know you only had 20 passes because you ran the ball, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. You ran the ball 24 times. And I know the Packers aren't getting a lot of possessions right now, especially against Detroit, when they couldn't get Detroit off the field on 4th down except for 1 time. But the Packers need to get Jaden Reed involved more frequently. They just have to. There's no denying it. There's no other way to put it. You have to get Jaden Reed more involved somehow. And get Emmanuel Wilson more involved. He had 1 carry for 7 yards. And I know Josh Jacobs is your guy. He's your starting tailback. I get that. I understand that. But the 1 carry he had, the 1 for 7 yards, he looked extremely explosive. Chris Brooks, 1 carry for 3 yards. I think you have to get Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks more involved in the ground game. And if Josh Jacobs is going strong, I get it. You don't want to mess with that. But 1 carry for 7 yards for Emmanuel Wilson is not enough to me. But as I mentioned, the biggest reasons why the Packers lost to Detroit is the first 3 possessions by the offense was atrocious. They could not get Detroit off the field when it mattered. As we saw with the game-winning field goal, Detroit went for it on 4th down with under a minute to go, got the first down, and then ran the clock out and kicked the field goal. They couldn't get Detroit off the field when they had to, when it mattered. The offense sputtered too much on the first 3 drives. And like I said, the officiating was not very good. And the Packers just shot themselves in the foot too many times in the game. But the Detroit game's over. Packers sit at 9-4. They could potentially make the playoffs if the Rams and 49ers finish tied today. The Falcons lose and the Packers win. The Packers are in the playoffs. So the Packers have a 90-something, 96, 97% chance that they're going to make the playoffs. The division title is pretty much done. That's not going to happen at this point. Now it's just trying to me, keep that 6 seed. Hopefully you can get the 5 seed if the Vikings falter a little bit, because what I don't want to have happen for the Packers, and there was a sports talk channel in the Milwaukee area, not one that I'm affiliated with, but another one that somebody was asking the question that if the Packers clinch the playoffs in these next couple weeks, do you start resting people to make sure you're healthy going into the playoffs? And to my answer, that is no. You don't start resting people at all. You play out the season, because I don't want to be the 7th seed. Because if you're the 7th seed, you're going to, in the first round of the playoffs, you're playing Detroit or Philadelphia, whoever has the 2 seed. Right now it's Detroit who has the 1. So you're going to be playing Philadelphia first round of the playoffs. Second round of the playoffs, if you beat if you beat Philly, you go back to Detroit in the second round. And I get you're going to have to probably beat one of those teams if you ultimately want to get to New Orleans. I get that. I understand that. But I don't want to play them back to back. Going to Philly and to Detroit, or to Detroit and then to Philly, is extremely difficult and hard to do. If you're the 6 seed or the 5 seed, you're going to play likely the winner. You will play the winner of either the NFC South or the NFC West. So you're going to play Tampa Bay, Seattle, or the Rams, more than likely. One of those 3 teams. I think the Cardinals are done. 49ers, they still have a shot at the playoffs, but likely you're playing one of those 3 teams. I'd rather play one of those 3 teams in the first round of the playoffs than Philly or Detroit. And then in the next round of the playoffs, if you're the 6 seed, you may have to go to the 1 seed, but I would rather play the NFC South or the NFC West in round 1 before having to go to Detroit or Philly. That's just me personally. Like I said, you're going to have to do it eventually, and maybe you have to go Detroit and Philly back to back in the divisional round and the NFC Championship game potentially. I can live with that. But I don't want wild card weekend to have to go to Philly and then divisional round go to Detroit or vice versa. I don't want that. So, no, I say you keep playing until you can get the 5 or the 6 and try to avoid that 7 spot as much as you possibly can. Heck, if Detroit falters, that 1 or 2 spot could be the Minnesota Vikings. And in that case, I'm fine going to Minnesota if that's the case, but I just don't want to go to Philly, or I don't want to go to Detroit in round 1. So, Packers play Seattle. I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent there, but the Packers are going to play the Seattle Seahawks of the NFC West. And the Seahawks currently sitting at 8-5, first place in their division by a whole game over the Rams. And then the Cardinals and the 49ers both sit at 6-7. The Seahawks are a team that have won 4 in a row, and their defense has been playing some pretty good football over the last 4 games. They came out of their bye, and their defense is probably playing the best football they had all year. Last week against the Arizona Cardinals, the defense got 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 9 passes defended, and 2 interceptions. I think you kind of know just based off that, what are some keys to victory for the Green Bay Packers against the Seattle Seahawks. Can't make mistakes. Seattle looks for mistakes. They fish for mistakes. They try to attack with pressure and try to force quarterback to make mistakes. And Kyler Murray made mistakes. He made 2 very bad interceptions in the loss against the Seahawks. Jordan Love has gone 3 games without an interception. For the Packers to beat Seattle, he really has to make it 4 in a row. And it's gonna be another game that you're gonna lean heavily on the run. Seattle is a pretty good team against the pass, but against the run, you can run on Seattle. And Josh Jacobs, Emmanuel Wilson, both of those guys should have some big weeks for the Packers if they want to beat Seattle. They're going to have to. And the Packers' offensive line, I guess you could point to that for a reason why they lost to Detroit. The offensive line did not play well whatsoever in the first, probably most of the first half against the Lions. So the Packers' offensive line needs to answer. The offensive line needs to answer and punch Seattle in the mouth. They have a tough defensive front with Williams, but they do give up some running yards. So that's going to be key for the Packers. The running back for the Cardinals, I forget his name off the top of my head, he had 90 yards on the ground in that game. Jacobs should get over 100 yards. And to win this game, Jacobs has to have probably at least 20 touches. And that can be receiving or running, but Jacobs has to have at least 20 touches for the Packers to win this game. So keys, don't turn the ball over. Get Jacobs heavily involved. And defensively, got to tackle. They have 3 very good wide receivers, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, receiver name I struggle to say, Jackson Smith, Nigbawa. I apologize for mispronouncing it, but those are 3 very good wide receivers. Metcalf has 812, JSN has 911 yards, and Lockett has 511 yards receiving. And Jackson, very good slot receiver. Packers have struggled defending the middle of the field. That's an area that Seattle can try to attack as much as possible. Kenneth Walker might be limited with an injury. He has been dealing with the calf, missed last week. This week he's up in the air. But they have 2 pretty good tailbacks in Walker and Charbonnet. And you're going to have to make sure you tackle well. And you can't allow Seattle just to stay on the field and kill the clock and take away possessions for your offense. The defense has to get off the field on 3rd downs. And if the Seahawks are going to go for it on 4th down, well, you got to get off the field on 4th. Seattle pass rush, most of it comes from Leonard Williams, defensive end. He's got 7 sacks on the year. Derek Hall, linebacker, with 6. Mati with 5. Dumont Jones with 4. Jaron Reed, former Packer, 2.5. But the thing is, Seattle might not get a lot of sacks, but they get a lot of pressure on the quarterback and make things difficult for the quarterback. They have a total of 11 interceptions on the season. As I said, they don't have a lot of sacks per se at 32, but they have 11 interceptions. They get pressure on the quarterback, and they force the quarterback to make mistakes. So Jordan Love protecting the football is going to be huge, and get pressure on Geno Smith. I know the Packers have played offensive lines that aren't very good against the pass in the past, and they haven't been able to get a lot of pressure since the Tennessee game where they had 8 sacks. Chicago, they couldn't get pressure. Detroit with an injured line, 1 starter out, couldn't get pressure on Goff. They got to get pressure on Geno Smith. Geno Smith will throw interceptions under pressure. He's got 12 interceptions, been sacked 40 times, and I think a lot of his interceptions, if I'm not mistaken, is when he's under pressure. So you got to get pressure on Geno Smith. the Packers do those things, they win. Protect the football, get pressure on Geno, get off the field on third down, score touchdowns instead of field goals. Those are 4 things if the Packers do, they're going to win this game. And, I did say another one. Get Josh Jacobs at least 20 touches in this game as well. But I think the Packers are going to win. And I think I've picked them every game this year thus far. And typically, I'm not one that is going to pick the Packers just for the sake of picking the Packers because I'm a Packer fan. And I know one of my friends is going to strongly disagree with that. But when I pick the Packers to win, I truly think they're going to win. And I think they're going to beat Seattle. I think Jordan Love has a solid game. I think Josh Jacobs have a huge game. And I think defensively we see more of the Tennessee Titans game with getting pressure on the quarterback than we do, let's say, Detroit or Chicago. But I think the Packers win, I would say 34-24, win by 10. And I think the Packers get the win and they move on to they improve to 10-4. So that's my thought there with the Packers. Nice thing with the Packers is Jair Alexander is a full participant today. They're still in concussion protocol, but Evan Williams and Romeo Doubs are full participants, and the Packers might have Luke Musgrave coming back in the next couple of weeks. That's going to add some problems and issues for other teams down the stretch with the athleticism that he could potentially bring in 2 tight end sets. He brings you more than Billy Sims athletically, and he's a guy that can attack the seam, attack the middle, and him and Tucker Kraft could be really dangerous on the field together, especially if you put him on the field with Christian Watson. You have Watson and Musgrave who can attack the seam. You have Tucker Kraft who is really good in getting open and can turn things into big plays, and it'll be interesting to see how the Packers try to incorporate the 3 of them potentially on the field together. So, moving on, NFL head coaches. Sorry, Siri thought I was talking to her really quick, which I wasn't. So, Siri, shut your mouth. NFL coaches on the hot seat. I think the biggest one is Doug Peterson. Fox Sports came out with this article, it would have been just a couple of days ago. Yeah, December 10th. And they have Doug Peterson on their power rankings of coaches likely to lose their job, which I'm not a fan of having power rankings on who's going to get fired. But I think Doug Peterson is definitely a coach that is probably on his last legs in Jacksonville. They're 3-10 on the year. He's not been very good the last couple years. It looked like Jacksonville was an ascending team during his first year in Jacksonville. And now by year 3, it looks like they are descending back into the abyss of consistent first-round picks. Top 3, top 4 picks in the draft. Brian Daboll from the Giants. And I'm torn on Brian Daboll if he should get another year or not. He had a really good first year, which is kind of will put the Giants in this mess they're in right now because they made the playoffs in year 1 with Daniel Jones having a decent year. And the Giants decided we have, instead of franchise tagging Daniel Jones and trying to make a long-term deal with Barkley, they did it the opposite way. They franchise tagged Barkley, and they gave a new contract to Daniel Jones. That is what the Giants decided they were going to do. Barkley leaves after the end of last season. Now Daniel Jones is on the practice squad with the Minnesota Vikings. I can't put that on Daboll. He's the head coach. He's not the general manager. But the Giants are averaging 14.9 points per game, and he's supposed to be an offensive innovator. He's supposed to be an offensive genius, and they're averaging 14.9 points per game. Some teams can trip to 17 points a game. He's at 14.9. And I think he showed a lot of promise in year one, but what we've seen the last 2 years, it might be time for New York to hit the reset button once again. I think they've had a new head coach pretty much every couple years since Tom Coughlin was no longer the head coach in New York. I think I'm pretty comfortable to say that if he sticks around for year 4, that'd be the longest tenured Giants coach since Tom Coughlin was I don't know if he was fired or resigned as head coach of the Giants. And eventually you got to get somebody, you got to have some consistency there eventually, but I don't know if Darboh is that guy. Antonio Pierce, the first-year Raider coach, another one of the interim coaches who finished strong, so he gets the job, and now he's at 5-4. He finished last year. Now they're 2-11, and a complete dumpster fire in Las Vegas. No quarterback, no wide receivers, and it's just a complete mess there. And I don't know if Mark Davis is going to give Pierce a second season as the head coach. I personally think he should. The team still plays hard. Even with the record. They haven't quit on Pierce, even with the turmoil. I think you give Pierce a chance to try to see what he can do once you try to improve the roster a little bit. Mike McCarthy in Dallas, number 4 on their list. He's a free agent at the end of the year. I think he's gone for that reason. He's a lame duck. He's not going to get fired. He's just going to be gone. And I think that might be the right choice. I didn't think Mike McCarthy was a good fit in Dallas from day one. Thank him for what he was able to do during his tenure in Green Bay. It ended badly in Green Bay, and now it's going to end badly again in Dallas. And I don't know what Mike McCarthy's next job is. Maybe he can go be the offensive coordinator for Bill Belichick in North Carolina if he loses his job. Zach Taylor, Cincinnati Bengals. And this is where I'm torn on. The Bengals are 5-8, 2-4 over their last 6, 2-7 in games decided by a touchdown or less. The offense, which he's an offensive coach, is humming along. Chase, Burrow are the top 2 at their positions in the league statistically, but that defense in Cincinnati is very bad. It is very bad, and I think Cincinnati needs to go a different direction. Now, the problem is, if Cincinnati decides to go another direction, they're just likely going to screw it up. They kept Marvin Lewis around too long, and they're probably going to screw it up trying to find a new head coach because the ownership structure, the ownership of the Bengals are complete idiots and imbeciles. Stefanski of the Browns. The Browns at 3-10 have been a disappointment, but they're still battling. I think he's a 2-time coach of the year. He's been unfortunately having to try to win games with Jameis Winston, who just throws the ball to whoever's open, even if he's wearing the other jerseys of the other team. And Deshaun Watson, who is no longer the same quarterback he was for that 1 year in Houston. And I think Haslam gets him another chance. So those are the top 6 coaches likely to be let go. But here's the thing. This never-ending revolving door of coaches for some of these teams, guess what? Doug Peterson's going to likely get fired, as he probably should at the end of the year. If I was a betting man, I would put every dollar in my pocket right now on the Jacksonville Jaguars needing a new head coach again in 2 to 3 years because they're going to get the hire wrong, and we're going to stay stuck in the mud, and we're going to need a new head coach again in at least 2 to 3 years. The Giants, same thing. They're going to screw it up. If they have fired Darboll, they're going to screw it up, and they're going to need a new head coach again in the next couple of years. And the Raiders, if they fire Pierce, guess what? They're going to screw it up and need a new head coach again. And the Cowboys, the same. The Bengals, the same. The Browns, the same. Now, these top 7 teams, or top 6 teams, that are likely going to need a new head coach next year, or their coaches are on the hot seat, all those teams are bad for a reason. You look at any NFL draft over the last probably 15 to 20 years, there's a good chance they were on that top 5 in those drafts more often than they weren't. They're probably in the top 10, top 15 more often than they weren't in the last 20 years. And the Bears are the same. The Bears are on this list because they fired their coach, but guess what? The Bears are the same way. Trying to think who else let their coach go. The Saints, typically, they had Sean Payton there for a while. They just made a bad hire to replace Sean Payton to begin with. That GM is digging them deeper and deeper in salary cap hell that the Saints are never going to get out of it unless the salary cap just absolutely balloons an additional $100 million in the next year or two. But bad teams stay bad for a reason. And those 6 teams that I just mentioned on the hot seat, mixed in with the Bears, they typically are bad because their ownership or the decision makers, the people the owners put in position to make decisions, general manager, team presidents, are not very good. Owner Jerry Jones has to fire general manager Jerry Jones if he truly wants to build a Super Bowl roster. That's just the way it is. The Raiders, they've been messing things up since they lost the Super Bowl to the Buccaneers. The Jaguars have not been good for several years. The Giants, like I said, they've had, I think, a new head coach within a year or two every year since Coughlin left. The Bengals, they've been patient. They were patient with Marvin Lewis. I think they're going to be patient with Taylor. He just needs to get a defensive coordinator who knows what the hell they're doing. And then Stefanski, Haslam's been known to change head coaches like some change their underwear. So we'll see what happens there. So the other big story of the day, I was going to talk some NIL. I'm going to table the NIL talk to next week because the other big story, which is very surprising and fits college and NFL, Bill Belichick is the head coach at the University of North Carolina. I don't really know what to feel in that. I really don't know how to feel that Bill Belichick is now coaching college football. He's second all time in wins, not too far behind Dan Shula. If he took an NFL job this year instead, he likely breaks Don Shula's record for career wins. But he's going to North Carolina, and I know likely it's to eventually have his son replace him at North Carolina, which last I knew his son was coaching Washington Huskies of the Big Ten, which still feels weird to say Washington Huskies of the Big Ten, but anyway, it's very interesting, and I don't really know which direction it's going to go for Bill in North Carolina. It's either going to be extremely successful or it's going to be a disaster, nowhere in between. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to be an enjoyable ride regardless. It's just going to be very interesting to see how he interacts with college kids, with high school kids, with trying to build a roster to compete. And he's talking about building an NFL factory. So just right there, North Carolina has no intentions of competing for national championships. Bill Belichick wants to bring talent in to get them ready for the NFL. And I know what you're thinking, if you're bringing in guys to develop to become NFL players, you're going to win some. You're going to likely compete for a national championship. Well, yeah, you're going to win games, but I don't know how close you're going to get to an ACC title and to a national championship game. I don't know how close you get to that if your biggest goal is just putting guys in the NFL. But it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how long he lasts there. His buyout is only big in year one. After July of 2025, his buyout drops to $1 million. So I know he said he doesn't plan on leaving North Carolina, but I think that contract says otherwise. So with that said, thank you for watching. Next week, I'll talk NIL, talk about my thoughts on that in general, because the transfer portal is open. So I'm going to talk transfer portal, going to talk NIL, and give my feelings on that, and then the Badgers' new offensive coordinator as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. This has been Talking Sports with Evan. I'm Evan Witallison. Find me on X at Evan with Sports. You see at the bottom corner of the screen, YouTube and Facebook. Talking Sports with Evan. I will get back with you next week, hopefully, as I always say, talking about a Packer victory and getting you ready for the Packers' next game. Have a great rest of your night. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you later.